Добрый день, меня зовут Дима Коваленко. Я сюда приехал к вам из Америки, так что я в таком состоянии сейчас. Я работал с Selenium, наверное, где-то 5 лет уже, и... Wait, I'm supposed to do this in English, sorry. I've been working with Selenium for about 5 years now, and I'm currently working at the company Groupon. I'm going to give them a plug because they paid for my trip here and the hotel and stuff, so that was awesome. So they rule. I have a little blog that I throw some things about, usually Selenium stuff and some other stuff that I find to complain about. But in general, this is who I am. And the reason that I am here today is because I really enjoy using Selenium, and I really enjoy figuring out ever more complicated things that we can do with Selenium and how you can test the application that you're using in a new and interesting way. And then when I figure it out, I think I want to share it with everybody, because sometimes it takes me a week just to figure out one little problem, and then I think everybody else has those same problems again and again and again. And why, I want to share with the community because I read other people's work and hoping that the other people will help me when I'm in trouble. So what I did is I took this presentation and all the examples that are on this presentation, and I threw them on GitHub. If you want to look at this. So basically I threw it out here, all the PDFs, all the Ruby code, and I'll be throwing some Java code, I hope, and Python code, and whatever other code we can find. But basically what I want to do is have a little project where it's like, hey, how do I do this? So you go to this little project and there's at least a sample code. It might not be very good code, it might not be pretty code, but at least you can get something done very quickly instead of having weeks and weeks of time researching. So this is the URL. I'll tweet it later, and I think Alex will provide all that information after the conference is also done. So I wanna run through some stuff really quickly. There's a lot of the stuff that I ran into working at both Groupon and other companies. And I will give you an example of how I came to it, but one of the very, very first things that I remember the first time I saw an Ajax application, I thought that was the most beautiful thing in the world, that you can load a picture and load these things and everything just kind of happens and you don't have to reload the page and everything is fast. And then I had to write a test for an Ajax-based application, and now I realized that I'm screwed, because all of a sudden Selenium or QuickTest Pro or Rational Robot, all those guys, they don't know how to deal with the asynchronous calls. And that's our earliest solution at some companies was to just add a sleep. Anytime you have an Ajax call, just sleep for 5 seconds, sleep for 10 seconds, and that will make the test pass. Except when the computer is running slow and all of a sudden it takes 20 seconds to load the page, all of a sudden all your tests become flaky and very, very inconsistent. So I bit the bullet one time and done some research to figure out how to make Ajax calls work really simple. So you will usually create your own little method that I always call it wait for Ajax. It's like wait for page to load. But it depends on whether you're going to be solving this issue in Selenium 1 or Selenium 2. In Selenium 1, you will be using a method called wait for condition. And in Selenium 2, it's execute script. The difference between them is in Selenium 1, wait for condition, it's basically you give it some sort of a JavaScript expression. And whenever that expression is true, then the loop that the wait for condition sits in, it will exit and you will continue. So basically the example here is that you will ask the jQuery how many active processes it has. When it has 0, it means everything is on a page is loaded. The only trick with Selenium 1 is you have to use that ugly Selenium, that browser bot, that get current window. Otherwise, you will not have access to the page. You have to go through the Selenium RC server, through the proxy, to get to the pages down. But once you do, you can execute jQuery In Selenium 2, the execute script always executes in the DOM's context, so you don't have to do the crazy browser byte stuff. So all you have to do is just say, hey, return JavaScript that active, and then put it in a loop, and it will just sit there and say, hey, it's 0, I'm done. Let's continue executing the steps. These are the 3 libraries that I did in that researching. So in jQuery, it's active, prototype, and Dojo. If whatever library you use, if you have something else, just find out a way to get to the active count of the requests that are in the background. Next thing I want to talk about is screenshots. So it's very nice to have screenshots when you're executing a test, especially when a test fails. So when you have a whole lot of tests executing in Jenkins or whatever CI tool you're using, when a test fails on a different machine, you cannot really see it. So we figured out a way to just, hey, why not use the built-in functionality that allows you to take screenshots? And Selenium already has it. Save for screenshot method is in Ruby, get screenshot as in Java. I'll be looking in Python and all the other ones, but basically they have a little method that you can call. And all you have to do is, it doesn't care if you're running tests in parallel and there's 5 windows that are on top of each other. If the most back window fails, it will take a screenshot of the most back window. So that will help you a lot. So we use Cucumber to execute our tests. It is very nice that embed feature in Cucumber. All you have to do is just pass in the screenshot image, and it will embed it into the report. So when you actually look at it in the output report, it looks very nice. And here's the failed test, and here's the screenshot. And all I did is modify the Cucumber's method for, hey, after the test is done, if there's a failure, just take a screenshot. And again, all this is in the project, so you can have the code for that. Yeah, I think that's it. So I think I'll just wait for the demos. I'll run the demos at the end, so we'll see how much time we have left over. But next thing is the idea of capturing a video on the test. Now, it's really easy to do when you're using Linux. I'm still trying to figure it out how to do it on the Mac and Windows. But when the test fails and you don't actually see why it's failing, a screenshot is not enough. So we're trying to add a video recording of the test as it is running. And then if the test passes, you just delete the test. But if it fails, you publish it in Jenkins or in CI and just say, hey, here's the test, here's the name of the video for the test. Just watch the video and you will know why the test failed. So I figured out a way how to do it for Linux. I'm using a gem for Ruby, but you can do it without Ruby at all. For Windows and Mac, I'm thinking of trying to use the VLC plugin, but I hear that there's other options available, so we'll see how it goes. But the idea is pretty simple. So you record the test. If it passes, delete it. If it fails, publish it. So this is the actual commands that the headless gem in Ruby does. And it's actually really simple. So we use XVFB, but you don't have to. XVFB is nice because you don't have to actually bring up a whole window. So it kind of saves you a little bit on memory and speeds up the process. But you use XVFB, the virtual buffer, and you just start it on this first screen. You give it a resolution, so make sure you have a nice big resolution so that your tests are stable. And then after that, we use FFmpeg application, which is a Linux application. You can just do apt-get install it, or on a Mac you can brew install it, and you just say, hey, use X11 grab, and tell it which display to grab. So X11 grab, the little blue part, that works really well on Linux-based systems. That's the only reason I cannot do this yet on Mac or Windows, because Mac or Windows does not have that yet, and I'm still trying to look at it. But after you record the video, it saves it to the temp file, and then deletes it or copies it over. So You don't have to be using the headless gem. You can implement something like this very easily yourself. Couple of tips. If you run tests in parallel, start each set of tests in a different display. That way, because otherwise you're going to have 5 windows on top of each other, and so the video is going to be just on the topmost browser. So start it in different displays and just record different displays all at the same time. This way it will help you, and each test has its own good video. And restart XVFB. Sometimes it's a little bit flaky, depends on what you use. But we've noticed that XVFB does not, after it's been running for about 2 weeks, 3 weeks of just nonstop testing, it starts to get a little bit flaky and the tests start to slow down and things like that. So restarting it really helps. Moving on to the next topic. So Selenium 1 allows you to have profiles. This is very useful if you need to test against a application and you want to have some extensions like Firebug or something else. While in the middle of a test run, you can have access to all those things. If you want to save the SSL certificates or if you want to save some passwords, great, you just create a Firefox profile in Selenium 1 and just point to it, and it will load it on every time it runs. In Selenium 2, you actually get to specify the profile on the fly, which is even better because now you can change the profile for each test. So this is some Ruby code. It's relatively easy to do. You just initiate a new instance of the profile, modify some settings. These are the Firefox settings, and start a new instance of the driver. This is very useful for me, again, with Firebug extension, because when a test fails and I'm trying to, or as I'm writing a test, I'm trying to find the button, but I don't know how to find it. You right-click and select the element. It gives you the whole path and gives you all the information. It's incredibly useful. Other things you can do with it, some cool things you can do with is if you overwrite this little guy and set it to 255, Firefox will allow you to authenticate in the URL. So if you have basic authentication on your website, usually you would not be able to talk to this pop-up. But now with that little thing, you can just say username and password and then the website you're going to, and you're automatically logged in, so that helps. This was submitted in WebDriver, the 2.4 and up already has this fix, so you don't have to worry about it, but this really helps with Selenium 1. In this example, so at Groupon we have this idea of once you've purchased a product from us, we will give you a PDF receipt that you then print out and you take with yourself to the store and you give it to the people. But we want to test that, hey, when I printed out that PDF file, that what I get is the same thing that is, my name is correct, the amount is correct, everything is perfect. So this started the whole daisy chain of things to do. So you went to the purchase page, you purchased, now you need a PDF. How do you download it? Well, first thing you need to do is override a couple of Firefox settings. Basically tell the MIME type. This is the Firefox, the save to disk option, the top one. This is a list of files that it will never ask you what to do with them. It will just automatically download it to files. So add whatever the file is. In this case, it will always download zip files and it will always download PDF files. Or if you want to always save movie files or something else from whatever project you're on, just save it automatically to disk, and then you can parse it out and figure out what's how good it is. And then you will have to override 2 other settings: the downloader and the folder list. So downloader is the location where you want the files to be saved, some temp directory, and then folder list is basically telling Firefox that, hey, use whatever is the default setting instead of giving a pop-up asking for the question, where do you want to save it? So that really helps when you have to download 20 PDFs all at the same time. And afterwards, I use PDF Reader Gem, but in Java it's a PDF box, and I think there's a Python library also, but basically it allows you to take a PDF and parse it out, and now you have access to the text on the PDF, and you can actually then go in and say, hey, my username is correct, the price is correct, the product is correct. So that helps. Headless tests, for those who have to execute a lot of tests and it takes forever, running the browser headlessly is actually saves time. Just on regular page loads, I've noticed that if you're not doing a lot of database related stuff, it will be about 2 times faster to just run it headlessly. And the nice thing about it is HTML unit is now built into the Selenium standalone jar file. So you don't have to configure much. All you have to do is just download the Selenium jar and start it, and it will automatically give you a headless browser. It is really fast, and it will emulate both Firefox, Internet Explorer, and Chrome, depending on what you need. But if you want to try something else, there's a project called Capybara WebKit. They're basically doing the same thing. They're using Qt framework from Nokia to start a instance of the WebKit browser and run it and test. From what they've showed on their website, basically they are getting crazy times. Something that used to take 15 seconds for a test now takes about 5 seconds to run. So it's definitely worth checking out. Next, we will talk about test in parallel. So it really we have at Groupon about 500 Selenium tests. And it takes, if you run them one after another, it's going to take you about an hour to finish. So now we run them in parallel on 3 computers, 6 tests in parallel. Now it takes about 20 minutes total time, which saves in the build time, especially since we run it several hundred times each day. So that kind of helps out. Again, you would be usually using the fork process if you want to just be on a system level. Windows does not support fork, but I'm not sure what to use with it. In Ruby world, parallel test gem is the lifesaver. What it will do is it will read, if you're using Cucumber or RSpec, it will read all your directories, it will take all the files, it will split them into nice little chunks and say, hey, I want 6 in parallel. It will split them up into nice little chunks, and then it will figure out how to launch them all for you. If you don't want to use parallel test gem, you can either use parallel gem in Ruby again, or just a regular Unix fork. And just a couple of tips about parallel stuff though. Make sure make sure you use a separate database for every test you run, because very quickly, if your database is local, if you're hitting that, it becomes a mess really quickly. So it's usually just create 5-6 databases and run against that. Make sure you don't have any tests that depend on the previous test or the next test, because that's just always a bad practice. Each test should be a test on its own, and whether 5 tests before it passed or failed, this one should not be influenced. And again, run it on separate displays if you want to record video of it, so it's relatively simple. Cool. Sauce. So how many of you have heard of Sauce Labs? Okay, pretty good chunk of you, that's good. So for those of you who don't know, basically they allow you to run some Selenium tests in the Amazon EC2 cloud. And this is really, really helpful because now you don't have to keep Internet Explorer 7, 6, 8, 9, 10. You don't have to keep track of those. They will keep track of all those files. You don't have to have a server for each of those things. You just say, hey, run these tests on Internet Explorer 5. Explorer 5, 6, and it will run for you. They have very, very nice test reports. They will record a movie for you as the test runs. They do a nice little printout. So in the example that I provided, it basically do that initial connection to the Sauce Lab and how to start a test, how to finish a test. And if you want to run the test against your local machine, instead of the example I used is Sauce Labs running against Google. But if you want to run it against your local hard drive or against a staging environment that's behind a firewall, they also have this Sauce Connect thing. So it will set up a SSH tunnel for you, and so the computers that are now in Amazon can come and hit your local computer or hit your staging and actually test against it. It's very easy to use. You don't have to know much about firewalls or anything else. You just kind of start this application and just say, hey, okay, now it will work from now on. So this is the Sauce Connect. And finally, the Selenium in iPhones, you will want to sometimes run the test on the actual native iPhone browser to make sure that everything is loading fine, that everything is visible, everything is running fine. And so iPhone now supports it in the iPhone simulator. I hear that they want to release the app to the App Store, so it will actually run on your phone, and you can actually hold your phone as the test is running on it. So that'll be really, really cool to see. A couple of things to note about it though is you will need Xcode to compile the iPhone WebDriver application. And so far right now there's no parallel support because iPhone Simulator can only run one instance and you will need a Mac. There's one other problem with pop-ups, like the OK alerts. WebDriver doesn't really know how to deal with those in the iPhone emulator. So that's pretty much it. Just another side note though. If you actually want to test an iPhone application as you're developing it, then actually click on the buttons of the application. Check out the project called Frank. It will basically, similar idea to Selenium, but basically run the clicking of the application and make sure that when you click buy on your iPhone application, things happen. So that's what we use. All right, now for the fun part. Let's actually execute some tests. So the Ajax. So in this example, we're going to be hitting the site reddit.com and we're just going to be logging in. As you can see, this Ajax call right here, the page doesn't reload when you log in. So that was like the easiest example I could find of an Ajax call. And it's really easy to just add a wait for Ajax call. And this is this is a very simple, probably not the best way to do the loop, but all it does is just sleeps for 3 seconds and says, hey, is everything loaded? If not, keep going. I cannot do the movie example because, again, I'm on the Mac right now, but Firefox profile example. And this example actually goes then to Selenium's website and downloads that PDF that's right here at the bottom. But I kind of stopped the test execution there just to show that, hey, now all of a sudden I have my Firebug and I can actually find the inputs of it. And we're doing it by loading the profile for the Firebug, but you can add any other extension you want. And all it is just this XPI file. And in the code, all we're doing here, is just doing, hey, add this extension, and then just tell it which version it is, so it never asks you, it just says, okay, let's just run with it. But right here is the example of how to download the PDF file automatically, and right here is me actually parsing the PDF. So if you run the thing from start to end, it will parse the PDF file and it will print out the very first page that's in a PDF. Oh yeah,
do you have Firefox preference row that describes like installing extension like on fly, not on fly, but from the as a JSON configuration for WebDriver now?
Okay, so do I have that? Yeah, I think it's this part right here. All it is just when you download the XPI file locally, all you have to do is just tell it where it is, and just like all you're doing is right now I'm doing a current directory and just a path to it, and then use the add extension method to.
Yeah, but this is done on fly.
Yes.
I mean.
Oh, if you want to do that, well, I don't have an example of that, but basically for that, you will just go to just start up a new the profile manager in Firefox, create a new profile, go and install everything you want and configure everything, and then you will go into the application support folder for that profile and just steal the whole profile folder, bring it over for Selenium 1. I don't have an example to do it for Selenium 2, but in Selenium 1 you can specify saying, like once you actually created that profile, you can then just say, okay, here's the path to this profile folder, just use that from now on.
Okay.
Yeah, I've done that before, and it works pretty well. So
Thank you.
I think I'll try to include that in the next version of the example. All right. This is I think so the parallel test example is again really easy. All I'm doing is just calling 3 instances of Firefox and just letting it go crazy. I think I've ran as many as 10 tests on this laptop before it starts to get really cranky. So if you have a very, very nice computer, you can run 10, 20, 30 tests in parallel. Depends on how nice the computer is, I guess. But this will really, really help to save up the amount of time. And there were several presentations earlier today about how to run things in parallel, and I won't go too deep into that. Okay, what else? Yes, the headless browser. So for the headless browser, so I'm starting the Selenium standalone jar right now. Oops. The background. And the thing about it right now, what the test is, oops. What the test will be doing is it will go to selenium.com and it will click on the tabs that are at the very top of the Selenium website. And it will just click on those things every time, and it will run, for the headless browser, it will run it 10 times, just click, 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 and then in Firefox it will do it 5 times in a row. And the reason I did it that way is to just show the time difference between doing it headlessly versus doing it in the actual profile. So it takes, the headless one is running a little bit slow, so this is the pages that it is currently on after the click. And the network connection here is kind of slow, that's why usually when I'm at home it just goes far. But yeah. But in general though, when I run headlessly, it takes about 12 seconds to do this test in headless mode, and it takes about 30 seconds to do it in Firefox. So huge, huge performance increase.
Do you have information on how, for example, Chrome use WebKit engine, Firefox use some
Gecko.
Gecko, and when I use HTML unit, does it repeat behavior of each of this engine, or it use its own engine?
So I believe it emulates it, but I'll let you answer it. There you go.
Totally separate.
There you go. Alright, so that test. So to prove the point though, so it took headlessly 41 seconds. It was actually faster here, so I blame the network connection here to actually. And finally, I think I'll do the. So this one is a little bit of my favorites because it's, I don't know, I'm just proud for able to see this, but you know, the iPhone simulator starts and it actually sees that. I mean, to me, it's like the coolest thing in the world to actually see it execute a Selenium test against a website and click on things and do screenshots in there and stuff like that. So I think that's pretty cool. So. That too, thanks. I couldn't remember the instance variable I was using. So, but yeah, so that's basically the. I want to keep this project going, and I will keep adding as new things that I find. Whatever is the next thing. I think sometimes I need to do testing in the Flash application, things like that. As that comes up, I want to keep updating this project. If anybody wants to help out and add some Java or Python examples, we will add them to the actual Selenium documentation so that other people like us can find it as an easy resource. But here it is on GitHub, just fork it, and I'll give you access to do whatever you need to do. So yeah, I think I'll take questions now. And again, I'm sorry that I'm so low energy. I just haven't slept in 2 days, so I'm like dying here. But yeah.
What about iPhone emulator?
Yes.
Do you think that it works exactly like a real phone?
It actually works really, really similarly to the real phone. I'm not 100% sure how different it is, but it seems to be, for the browser point, it's actually really accurate. But again, when they're working on publishing it as an application in the App Store, so you can actually put it on a phone and run it on the real phone instead of the emulator in the future, so that will be even cooler. I think you can, if you have a developer account, you can compile the app and just put it on your iPhone or on the iPad yourself and run it there. So it will actually run on the hardware that
why on the iPhone?
I played around with the Android. It's still very slow and very difficult to use, and again, most of it is just very, very painfully slow. And that's the only reason. Just to go from one page to another will take you a minute. It's just painful.
Thank you.
Why do you execute the test on Linux if most users use Windows?
It's debatable, but actually, a lot of the OS 10 seems to be a growing trend, but we do execute tests on Windows 2, but they are not as fast and not in parallel. So for the Windows, we set up a Selenium grid with 5 boxes, and we make a lot of commits for every developer, because every developer, as he writes the code, he wants to check that everything is passing. So he pushes it really quickly. But we need speed for that, so we use Linux for that. But when the code actually makes it into the master branch and we run the full suite against it, it also uses against Windows. But in general, though, in our end, also the other thing about it is our end is majority of our users, majority of the difficult things are actually done in the background that normal people don't see on the website. And the people who use it, they are good people who use Firefox. They never use Internet Explorer. They use only Google and Firefox. And so, it's so nice to actually have these salespeople use a good browser. And so for the back end, we don't even bother developing for Internet Explorer. We just all just like, okay, let's try it for Firefox and be happy with it. So a lot of the Selenium tests now are actually testing the functionality, but the front end, that's the reason we use sauce is to run against Internet Explorer front end as a regular user would.
Sauce is free?
They do a free account, but it's very limited. It's only about 50 hours a month. But they do have some competitive plans to, it's about, they charge about like $1 per test or something like that on average. So it is a little bit expensive, but if your company wants to have coverage, and that's the thing that we don't run against Internet Explorer 6-7 every single time. We just run it once a day to save on the money. But you will have to pay for that. And I think they might have an unlimited account, but there will be something the company would buy.
Thanks.
Hello, I saw you used Cucumber. This is well-known driven framework. And could you describe the pros and cons of using this keyword-driven approach in your case?
So using pros and cons of using Cucumber versus
Versus, for example, using WebDriver directly from Ruby and having something like the approaches that were described before.
well, so the Cucumber is actually, all it is just a framework to write a test in a normal language.
But you always need to write these keywords to maintain these keywords. This is what looks like additional layer of abstraction that could be skipped because it just increases maintenance time.
Yes and no. So we do not actually do documentation per se. Our tests are our documentation, and when the test is written, I want to bring up the test real quick so I can show it. So when a test is written like this, and you can write it in Russian or in Chinese or whatever, and it's easy to read it the first time, the developer writes the test, and then as the functionality changes, you will have to update the test. But you're only updating the background of the test. Cucumber just uses describes a function saying, if I'm a user and I click buy button, I actually will purchase a coupon or I will purchase a ticket. So we use Cucumber to describe the actual behavior of the function of the application, and the actual implementation is done in pure Ruby with WebDriver calls. So if you look into the steps file, I mean, all I'm doing is just doing direct WebDriver calls. But again, this is simplified. We use actually Capybara in actual work environment, so I didn't include it here because again, it's Ruby only, whereas Cucumber will be supported for any language, whether it's Java or Python or whatever. But you can write direct test in WebDriver. I do recommend if you're in a Ruby world, use Capybara because it makes things so much easier. It converts the whole page into the objects right away. So you can search easier. You can search by XPath without actually being slow because it's now doing in the Ruby code instead of in the Internet Explorer. So and then when you do clicks, it actually figures out really well. So if you're gonna do Ruby, use Capybara. But
thank you.
When it comes to source labs and the costs of your spending towards like execution tests, don't you think it would be cheaper if you used like EC2 with your own established you establish the nodes and hub and everything?
Yes and no. So yes, it would be cheaper upfront because you will be only paying for EC2. The thing about Sauce Labs is what you're paying per test already includes the EC2 price also, but now you will have to find a way to start all the internet computers in the EC2, and then you will have to connect to them, and then you have to figure out a way how to do SSH connection because when we run a test, I'm running it against my laptop, and the data that is in the database is in my laptop. So you will have to figure out an SSH tunnel from EC2 to your laptop, and they did all that for you.
Okay, if it's not SSH, if it is Windows, and I have my VPN.
Okay, and you're running against the production thing, then yeah, it could be cheaper. I'm not sure about the exact numbers, but it'll be probably about 10-30% cheaper. I'm not sure how much exactly, but it will not be that much cheaper.
So okay.
Because yeah, it costs about what is it, 50 cents or 60 cents a minute to run an EC2 computer for a small one. If you want a powerful one, it costs like $1.20. And this is we're using a bunch of them right now. We're using like 40 of those, and we're talking about 8 processors, 60 gigabits of RAM, really strong computers. And it costs $1.20 a minute to have them running, whether they're doing anything or not. So if you don't shut them down, then you're paying all day, 24 hours a day. So it could be cheaper if you want to do all the work, and if you do all the work, good for you. But hey, they already took all the hard work out for you, and they record a video for you, and they do nice reports. So that's kind of the reason we go with them instead of just writing it ourselves.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.